In today's video, a 41-year-old real estate agent from Newport Beach stood at the closed access gate to the Badwater Basin salt flats in Death Valley and screamed at a federal park ranger for 14 consecutive minutes. The closure had been issued that morning under a Stage 4 emergency heat advisory. The ranger she screamed at had been with the National Park Service for 8 summers. He had worked the Badwater corridor for 6 of them. He had a paramedic license he had held since before he became a ranger. He was the same person who, 8 hours later, would walk out onto the salt flats with 2 members of the recovery team and identify her body by the silver bracelet on her left wrist. The date was August 4th. The hiker was a 41-year-old realtor, named in the incident summary only by her initials, KD, a Newport Beach resident going through a contested divorce. She had described the Death Valley trip on her personal social media account on the morning of August 3rd as a transformation trip. The trip itinerary, found later in a leather-bound planner on the passenger seat of her rental, listed 4 stops over 4 days. Badwater Basin was day 2. The Salt Flats Walk was the only item written in bold on the page. She had circled it twice in red ink. Ranger Daniel Pham was the lead ranger on the Badwater corridor that morning. He was 36 years old. He grew up in San Jose, the second son of a Vietnamese mother and a Korean father, both medical professionals. He worked 4 years as a city paramedic before applying to the National Park Service. He brought a paramedic's framework to his ranger work that did not fully translate. In the city, he was trained that the people in front of him were almost always patients. In the park, he learned that the people in front of him were almost always travelers, and that the line between traveler and patient could be crossed in the space of a refused signature. He spent 6 summers on the Badwater corridor. He assisted in 19 recoveries and led 7 of them. He kept the list of names in a small notebook in the chest pocket of his uniform. He carried the notebook because a senior colleague on his first summer told him the names were the only part of the job that required keeping. The Stage 4 heat advisory had been issued by the park superintendent at 6 a.m. on August 4th. The advisory triggered a temporary closure of the Badwater Basin Salt Flats Spur Trail. The closure included the boardwalk extension, the salt polygon viewing area, and the open salt flats walkout beyond the boardwalk. The closure did not include the parking lot or the visitor pullout. Rangers had been posted at the gate at the head of the boardwalk by 7 a.m. Pham was assigned to the gate from 10 a.m. The kiosk thermometer at his post at 11 a.m. read 117 degrees Fahrenheit. The projected high for the salt flat surface that afternoon was 148. The Newport Beach hiker pulled into the Badwater lot at 11:14 a.m. She parked her rental in the closest spot to the gate. She stepped out wearing a white linen jumpsuit, a wide-brimmed sun hat, leather sandals with a low heel, and a thin silver bracelet on her left wrist. She carried a designer canvas tote that held a phone, a wallet, a small water bottle, a tube of sunscreen, and a packet of mint chewing gum. She did not bring trekking poles. She did not bring hiking shoes. She walked directly to the gate. Pham introduced himself. He told her the trail was temporarily closed under an emergency heat advisory. He told her the closure would lift the following morning if the projected high dropped below 115. He offered her a printed copy of the advisory. She refused the printed copy. She told him she had driven from Newport Beach the previous day. She told him the Salt Flats Walk was the reason for the trip. She told him she had circled the date in her planner 3 weeks earlier. She asked who he was to tell her she could not walk on public land. Pham answered each question evenly. He stood with his arms relaxed. He did not raise his voice at any point in the next 14 minutes. He repeated the closure language. He explained the surface temperature. He named the 4 most recent fatalities at Badwater, 2 of them in the previous 12 months. He told her, the closure would be enforced. He told her, in the standard language he had been trained to use, that if she attempted to enter past the gate, she would be subject to a federal citation. She screamed. She screamed for 14 consecutive minutes. The screaming was recorded on the kiosk's audio surveillance system and was later reviewed as part of the incident record. The transcript ran 11 pages. She told Pham she would have his job. She told him she paid taxes. She told him she had not flown across the country and driven 5 hours to be told what to do by a government employee in a brown uniform. She named a federal politician she said she would be calling. She named a regional news outlet she said she would be contacting. She pointed at Pham, she pointed at the gate, she told him she would not forget his name. Pham did not respond after the first 3 minutes. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He waited. She left at 11:35 a.m. She walked back to her rental. She did not drive out of the lot. She started the engine, ran the air conditioning, sat in the car for 9 minutes, and then drove south on Badwater Road. Pham watched her go. He noted the departure time, the plate, and the direction of travel. He called the parking sweep ranger at the Natural Bridge pullout 2.5 miles south and asked her to log any vehicle matching the plate that came into her lot. He set his radio to monitor Channel 3. He returned to the gate. He did not move from his post for the next 4 hours. The Natural Bridge pullout ranger logged the Newport Beach rental at 11:48 a.m. The vehicle parked at the back of the dirt lot. A woman in a white linen jumpsuit got out. The pullout ranger, Maria Ortiz, 29, on her third summer at Death Valley, noted the time and the parking position. She watched the woman walk toward the trailhead for the Natural Bridge Canyon Trail. The woman did not enter the canyon. She turned left at the trailhead and walked north along the shoulder of Badwater Road, back in the direction she had come. Ortiz radioed Pham. Pham acknowledged the call. He marked the time. He requested a second patrol unit to sweep the road north of Natural Bridge for foot traffic. The patrol unit was 28 minutes out. The Newport Beach hiker walked along the shoulder of Badwater Road for 1.5 miles in temperatures of 118 degrees, in leather sandals, carrying a designer tote and a small water bottle. She drank from the bottle twice during the walk. The walk took her 36 minutes. She approached the back of the Badwater Basin parking area at 12:24 p.m. She did not return to the lot. She turned off the road and walked east across the alluvial fan and onto the salt flats themselves, entering the closure area not from the gate, but from a point approximately 400 yards south of the gate, where the gate was no longer visible from her position, and her position was no longer visible from the gate. She walked onto the salt flats at 12:31 p.m. Pham did not see her enter. He was at the gate. His sight line was north along the boardwalk. The salt flats south of the boardwalk were partially blocked by a small rise in the alluvial fan. He learned of her entry at 1:11 p.m. when the patrol unit sweeping the road north of Natural Bridge radioed in that the rental was parked at Natural Bridge with the driver gone and that fresh footprints in the dust on the road shoulder were heading north. He calculated her likely position. He calculated her likely water remaining. He calculated her likely core temperature. He radioed dispatch and requested the Paramedic helicopter on a 30-minute standby. Dispatch confirmed. He upgraded the standby to launch at 1:14 p.m. The helicopter was airborne at 1:21 p.m. Pham loaded the service truck with 6 liters of water, an IV electrolyte kit, the litter, a cold pack cooler, a thermal blanket, and the satellite phone. He drove south along Badwater Road at 1:18 p.m. He was accompanied by Ranger Caleb Doyle, 31, on his 5th summer at Death Valley, who had been pulled from the Furnace Creek office. They reached the alluvial fan entry point at 1:26 p.m. They followed the footprints out onto the salt flats. The footprints were clear in the dust and salt crust for the first half mile. They became harder to track in the harder salt polygons farther out. FAM used the helicopter's overhead spotting to refine the search line. The helicopter circled at 500 feet. It spotted the hiker at 1:48 p.m. She was approximately 1.1 miles out from the alluvial fan on a section of pure salt crust with no shade in any direction. She had walked in a straight line east. She had stopped at the edge of a slightly elevated polygon, sat down on the salt, and removed her sandals. The sandals were beside her. Her tote was open beside her hat. The small water bottle was empty. Her phone was face down on the salt. She was unresponsive. Her skin was hot and dry. There was no sweat on her face or her jumpsuit. FAM reached her at 1:54 p.m. He performed the initial assessment. She had no detectable pulse at the wrist. She had a faint pulse at the carotid. Her core temperature, taken by tympanic thermometer, read 107.8 degrees Fahrenheit. He began immediate field cooling. He poured water across her neck, her chest, her armpits, and the inside of her wrists. He placed cold packs at the femoral arteries and at the carotids. He laid the thermal blanket as a sunshade. He did not start an IV. He recognized from his paramedic training that her presentation was past the window where fluid replacement would help. He worked the cooling protocol for 19 minutes. Doyle stood at the edge of the polygon and held the radio. The helicopter medics landed on a flat polygon 200 yards north at 2:13 p.m. and reached the hiker at 2:18. The medics confirmed cardiac arrest at 2:19. They attempted resuscitation on the litter as they carried her toward the helicopter. They worked the salt crust slowly. The crust was uneven and the litter required 2 stops for the lead medic to rebalance her weight. They reached the helicopter at 2:31 p.m. The flight to the Pahrump Regional Medical Center took 22 minutes. She was pronounced at 2:58 p.m. The cause of death listed on the autopsy was hyperthermia with cardiovascular collapse. The contributing factors listed were dehydration, exposure on closed terrain, exertion at unsafe ambient temperature, and inadequate equipment for the chosen surface. The body identification was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the Pahrump Medical Center. The next of kin, an adult sister in Newport Beach, had been notified at 4 p.m. The sister could not travel until the following morning. The identification protocol required confirmation from a federal officer who had had contact with the deceased prior to the incident. FAM was the only federal officer who had documented contact. He volunteered for the identification. His supervisor offered to assign it elsewhere. FAM declined. He told his supervisor only that he had been on the gate when she came through, that he would be on the gate when the report was filed, and that the identification was the part of the day that connected the two. He drove to Pahrump that evening. He was accompanied by his supervisor, who had been with him on his first recovery 6 summers earlier. They were taken to the cold room at 7:14 p.m. FAM identified the body by the silver bracelet on her left wrist. He signed the form. He walked out of the medical center at 7:22 p.m. He did not speak on the drive back to the park. His supervisor did not ask him to. The medical explanation for what happened to her body on the salt flats is not new. The salt crust at Badwater, in direct sun at ambient temperatures above 115 degrees Fahrenheit, reaches surface temperatures between 140 and 150 by midday. Radiant heat from the crust passes through thin fabric and into the body at rates substantially higher than the body can dissipate through sweat. Leather sandals provide minimal insulation from the surface. A small water bottle of the type she carried holds roughly 12 ounces, which at her body weight and her chosen exertion would have lasted approximately 28 minutes. She had been on the salt flats for more than 1 hour and a half before she stopped. Her core temperature by the time she sat down would have already crossed the threshold at which most adults lose the capacity to recognize their own state. The screaming at the gate was not the cause. The screaming was the surface of the cause. The cause was the certainty, fixed weeks earlier when she had circled the date in red ink, that the walk on the salt flats was an item she was going to complete on day 2 of the trip. The closure had not been part of the plan. The closure had been an obstacle to be moved aside. Pham had not been a person standing at a gate. He had been the embodiment of the obstacle. The 14 minutes of screaming had been addressed to the obstacle, not to him. The walk along the road shoulder had been a route around the obstacle, not an escape from the trail itself. Each decision had followed from the certainty that the plan was the trip and that the trip had to occur. Pham returned to the gate the morning of August 5th. The advisory had lifted. The closure was no longer in effect. He worked his standard shift. He turned back 4 parties that morning. Under the standard advisory language, none of the 4 argued. He did not mention the previous day. He has stayed at Badwater. He still keeps the notebook. The Newport Beach hiker's name is the 8th name on his list. He has added 2 names since. The pattern Pham watched at the gate on August 4th was, by his own quiet accounting, the 11th time in his 6 summers at Badwater that he had been screamed at by a visitor refused entry to a closed trail. 6 of the 11 had left the park without incident. 3 had been cited for entering the closure area and had been recovered alive. 2 had not. The pattern is not about the screaming. The pattern is about what the screaming protects, which is a plan that has already been written, and the question of whether the plan will be allowed to revise itself before the desert revises it instead. The deadliest hour at Badwater is not the hour the temperature peaks. It is the hour at the gate, when a ranger reads the closure language to a visitor who has already decided that the closure does not apply to her, and the ranger knows already that he is not the last person who will see her, but he is the last person who could have changed what happens next. Pham was both. The bracelet was the same. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more, click on your screen.